activate it. I'm going to just put this right here, but I will grab it. Yeah, this is up. Right? Yeah, I'm in the frame. All right, welcome to tonight's segment of the faculty lecture series. For those who don't know who I am, I'm Jess Gallardi. I'm professor and director, and I coordinate the lecture series here. So thanks for attending tonight. Keep an eye out for upcoming lectures, and the RAC cards are in. They're over there on the chair. Feel free to grab one on the way out. Next week, we have 2 lectures. On Tuesday, March 4th, Dr. Sandra Gavin and Dr. Courtney Allen Pavlak of Counselor Education will be giving a lecture, and next Thursday, March 6th, Dr. Beth Bonsetter of Communications will be presenting a lecture as well. So this evening's event is presented by Dr. Savala DeVoge, Vice President of Student Affairs, and sometimes moonlights as an FYS instructor. Savala started at Adams State as the Vice President for Student Affairs in 2023. She spent nearly 20 years in higher education working at both public and private institutions. Savala earned her doctorate in educational leadership in the discipline of higher education administration from Idaho State University in 2013 and has had a passion for student access and student success since she was a student. She is also currently serving as the chair of the Professional Development Committee for the NASPA region, the regional close to us. Most of her career highlights are better shared on the comedy stage, and I can attest to that. If you ever get to get on Space Mountain with Dr. DeVoe, take that opportunity. It is worth it, as well as other rides. And if you're really into Star Wars, she's your person as well. Tonight's lecture is titled Closing the Gap, Social Determinants of Student Success and Basic Needs. And in her words, campuses have made intentional efforts to recruit more diverse classes of students. This diversity includes not just race and ethnicity, but also includes socioeconomic background, personal backgrounds of students, ability, system impacted students, whether that is foster system or the justice system, preparation for college, parenting students, first generation, and the list goes on. This diverse mosaic of students enriches our campuses with different lived experiences, but also brings to light barriers to success these students may face. This program will take a deeper dive in the history of social determinants of health and the evolution of social determinants of student success, and how we can make an impact on our campus towards success for our students. So help me in welcoming Dr. DeVoe.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you for everybody that could be here and those that are watching online. I've learned from 2 really good supervisors in the past that you always start by thanking your partner for being here. So big thank you to my second gentleman, Lane, for being here supporting me. And it means a lot, right, to have folks here. And as Jess said, I've been in higher education for almost 20 years, and that feels like a really long time. The older I get, the longer that will get. But what I can promise is that tonight's gonna have some conversation around what it means to be working with social determinants of student success, student belonging as a basic need for students in their success. And we'll kind of go from there. It would not be a student affairs type lecture if we didn't have story time. And so I will keep it as appropriate as I can, but keep in mind, I work with students for a living, and there's not a lot that is appropriate that happens there. Yeah, I was promised a remote. There we go. Okay, so I always want to start with the land acknowledgement because this is not our land, right? So we, the Adams State University community, gratefully acknowledge the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands we gather. This beautiful San Luis Valley is sacred to many indigenous nations, including the Utes, Jicarilla Apaches, Comanches, Kiowas, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Navajo Nation, Pueblos, and all other First Peoples who once made this valley their home. We honor the diverse communities that historically dwelled here, and those who currently reside in the San Luis Valley. We know that honoring these lands is a reflective process that demands continued engagement and action. And so rather than just reading a land acknowledgement every now and then, it calls on us to really have some idea of place and purpose for what we do and who we serve. This would not be a student affairs conversation if I did not give you the warning, right? You may want to jot down some notes. Please don't write anything that would be embarrassing to my students. None of them are students at this institution, and I won't share names, but engage in this conversation in whatever way is best for you. This is one of those that can be a conversation, so feel free to participate. But we are going to have some uncomfortable conversations about privilege and power, and that can kind of set some people off. So I mark this as an orange conversation. It's not quite red, but it's also maybe a little meaner than yellow. Welcome to Student Affairs. This is the faculty side of it, right? We'll have learning outcomes. We're going to talk about the history of higher education, talk about how the student population landscape has changed. We're going to talk about social determinants of student success, be able to identify those, what they mean, talk about the research, and then we're going to talk a little bit about current campus barriers to student success and maybe how we can lean into the discomfort of recognizing where those barriers are created, usually by us, and how we can break those barriers only by us. So the growing needs of our students. Historically, if you want to go into the deep, dark history of higher education, a lot of colleges were started as religious schools, right? And so folks of privilege were able to send their sons to go to school. You fast forward to men going off to war, women going to college, yay. Men come back from war, Montgomery GI Bill kicks in, now we're educating veterans, right? Somewhere during this time, we start having HBCUs pop up, but then we also start talking about integration and what it means to have a culturally and ethnically and racially diverse campus. Post 9/11, the Veterans Administration recognized a wider range of those who are eligible for support. So not just those who had been active duty military, but 9/11 changed that. Women were taken out of the workplace for a while because men were flooding the workplace again after coming back from active duty. And so, what were we going to do, right? We were going to go back to school, and schools were accepting of women. We start seeing more women's colleges pop up. Women are going into men's colleges in high enough numbers that they start to become a little concerned about the ratio.
I know where those all women's colleges are at.
One was in Idaho.
Missouri.
So we have this need to support parenting students too. Because a lot of these women that are going to school while they have children. All of these things become an expectation, but with no additional funding. Rarely additional staff, okay? We have pre-Montgomery GI Bill, we've got deans of men and deans of women. Not really a dean of students yet, right? GI Bill comes out, we don't have a veterans center yet, that doesn't exist, that becomes an unfunded mandate. We end up with things like a dean of students office, a vice president of student affairs. We have student affairs finally for a change, rather than talk to your faculty, maybe somebody will feed you, right? So we start to see these offices coming into play. Institutions have broader access to students with disabilities because of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And not only does that open up access to students with physical disabilities, which people were like, oh yeah, we can handle that, right? But it also comes for students with different learning abilities. All of the spectrum of disability. Yeah?
Won't you tell them the story about the swimming at College of Idaho?
Oh, we'll get there.
Okay.
Disabilities come with a lot of lawsuits if you don't do it right? So conversations that finally started to happen was how do we make college accessible to the folks that we can let in? One example, thank you, good cue. One example, when I was working at College of Idaho, we had a student who was wheelchair bound, okay? She was a swimmer. She loved to swim. We did not have a lift that could put her in the pool by herself. So the only time she could swim was if there was somebody there to work the hand crank lift. So our director for disability services calls Mr. Mike Shines, God rest his soul, and says, we need a lift that she can use on her own. And he says, we can't afford a lift. She said, you can't afford to close, because that's what will happen to the school. She was sassy. I loved her. We share a birthday. I think that has something to do with it. But she put it in no uncertain terms that unless this student had access, no student had access. We were trying to start a swimming team at the time. The school was having none of it. So they had to buy a lift, okay? One small example. When I was an undergrad, we remodeled our student union building. We did it in wings because the ADA says if you do a certain amount of remodel, you have to bring it up to code. Well, the university didn't want to bring it up to code, so they did it in wings and called it 3 separate buildings so that they didn't have to bring it up to code because each of those was under their requirement. Could you get away with that today? Probably not. In the dark ages when I went to school, maybe. I had a student last semester ask me if my transcripts were handwritten, so take that for what it's worth. Pell Grants make college more affordable for low-income students. More affordable. It does not magically mean that low-income students have access to education, right? And we're going to talk about access. So more recently, we have No Child Left Behind. A lot of those kids maybe were left behind in different ways. So No Child Left Behind. We have all these unfunded mandates that come out. Pell Grants do not rise with the cost of education at all. Second Chance Pell, depending on the mood of the education department, is sometimes a thing. Sometimes it's not. We have unhoused, incarcerated, system impact students, access to mental health services. Basic needs are out of reach for a growing population. We are going to see more and more students coming to college who do not have other access to social support services, okay? Part of the reason they come to school is that they can get housing with financial aid. Part of the reason they come to school is they can get free mental health care. On a lot of campuses, they can get free health care. All of those things are the reason, right? So they'll stay in school as long as they can because now we are social services and we work with people in that way, right? It's what we do in higher education. We kind of made this bed. I joke a lot with the Board of Trustees that a student has to Maslow before they can bloom, right? It's cute, it's punny. But I would say that this kind of puts us in danger of oversimplifying things, okay? If we say, oh, student has the things they need and they're gonna be ready to learn. A couple of examples. I had a student on move-in day. We hadn't even made it to orientation yet. Move-in day. And I'm walking across campus to the first-year residence hall, and a naked young man falls out of a tree. And I thought, that's odd. It's not generally the season for that yet. I was with one of my colleagues who was like dorm dad for the first-year dorm. We go over to the student, and I was like, Justin, give him a shirt or something and cover him up. So I asked him, I was like, what? How did this happen? You seem to not be dressed. And he said, well, my Frisbee got stuck in the tree. I bet there's more than that. So his Frisbee had gotten stuck in the tree. He took off his shoe, chucked it in the tree, and the shoe got stuck in the tree. So he took off his other shoe, and he chucked it in the tree, and the shoe got stuck in the tree. And it just kept going until he got in the tree, got a little stuck in the tree, fell out of the tree. So we marched him back to his residence hall, where his parents were moving him into his room with literally every piece of technology you could imagine. So obviously he's got a room. He's got all the things. I walk in, they're hooking up his Apple TV. He's got his iPhone in there. He's got his iHome thing. I don't know. My iPad is iPad. My iPod is iPod. Like, there are no generations in my house. And so he had all the things. Was he ready to do any of these things? No, probably not, no. So it's not a guarantee link, okay? Similarly, that year, I had a student who showed up to orientation over the summer. It was a summer orientation. And she and her dad sat about a row apart from each other the entire time. They didn't make eye contact. They didn't talk to each other. I first wondered if they had even shown up together. And it was her dad, okay? And I thought, that's going to be a long drive home. Something has happened here. File it away. Don't think too much about it. And move-in day comes. And the dad pulls up on the curb, still on the main boulevard, pulls up on the curb, puts the truck in park, does not even kill the engine, gets out, climbs up in the back of the truck, and just starts picking her stuff up and dropping it on the sidewalk. And he says, I'll see you at Christmas. And I was like, or no, he said, I'll see you in May. And I was like, Christmas? You get that back. We do not stay open for housing. Hello. This student had none of the things, right? About all she had was shelter, because I knew she was living in the residence halls. So I went and got one of the RAs, and I said, go introduce yourself to that student, make it not weird. Help her get moved in, introduce her to some people. She actually did better in school than that student who had shown up with all the things, okay? So while it is important for us to support students, there is no magic bullet. I would love to tell you there is. There's just not. Now, campuses are still kind of stuck at here, right? These are what basic needs are. Students need food, shelter. Students need housing. And then we kind of stop, even finances. We'll give you some financial aid. But hopefully, after tonight's discussion, you'll agree with me that our responsibility has shifted somewhat to this piece, to this love and belonging piece. If you look at the research, and it's not even new research, okay? This is not like Savala's groundbreaking anything. But if you look at the research, even really old research like Chickering, okay? Chickering's 7 victors was what, 70s, right? If you get into Chickering's research, there is development around belonging, okay? And identifying interpersonal relationships, which leads to a student building personal identity, which leads to a student learning purpose. It started at that belonging piece, okay? Erickson, probably a contemporary of Chickering, also put out there's a difference, like students are learning intimacy versus isolation. They're learning interpersonal versus intrapersonal. What can I do on my own? What do I need other people for? Okay? And when you're thinking about those things on kind of a social spectrum, student development stops if there is not a level of belonging. Okay? That's why it's important to build that. You look at Tinto's theory of student departure, and if students don't feel connected, they leave. I dug back into my dissertation research, which, boy, that was a Space Mountain ride on back. And my dissertation research was on academic self-efficacy and how students develop that feeling of, yeah, I can do it, and I can do it on my own. And this was a mixed methods study, which don't do that to yourself, like, ever. Mixed methods study, grounded theory, don't do that to yourself, like, ever. But what came out of it were some recommendations that I had since forgotten, so pardon me for using notes. But the first is developing academic competence. I can do the math thing. I can write the paper thing, okay? Next is identifying a peer group. Ooh, we've already made it to a belonging piece. Gaining academic comfort, participating in meaningful experiences. We've got a deeper sense of that belonging piece. And then, once they have those pieces in place, they move on to academic self-efficacy. There are barriers and challenges that stand in the way of that as well. I had a student who, I loved his mother. I wanted to love his mother. He and his mom came to orientation. She was with him at everything, and I was like, thank goodness. Here's a parent that is engaged. Move-in day, she shows up to move-in day, and I was like, this is interesting, because you're not living on campus. You're not really moving in. Okay. later on that night, I'm handing out welcome week schedules. Everybody gets a personalized schedule because I have no hobby, right? And I'm in the room with students who are not living on campus. And I keep looking at my pile, and my pile is getting shorter, and there's still at least one more person in the room than there should be. And it was Mom. Okay? It's important for Mom to know what he's up to. Send them on their merry way. Opening event that night is a Guitar Hero tournament. If you're old enough to remember Guitar Hero. Guitar Hero tournament. I do some cleanup, send everybody off to that. I do some cleanup. I go walking over to check on the event because part of my job was student activities, and I walk in just in time to watch his mom win the championship round. There's a bit of a red flag. I'm not worried about Mom belonging, sir. So every day, Mom brings him to campus. He lives off campus, so Mom brings him to campus, packs him a lunch. Mom goes home. Mom comes back to pick him up. Gas prices go up. Welcome to the world, right? Gas prices go up, so Mom brings him to campus and Mom stays. I was like, why are you doing this? So Mom stays. After midterms, Mom decides that his study habits are not acceptable, so Mom starts going to class. And I get a faculty member who calls me and says, I need you to talk to this student's mom. I was like, I need you to talk to the student's mom. She's not sitting in my class. So I talked to the student's mom. She happens to be in my building, hanging out every day. I talked to the student's mom, and I said, we can't have you going to class. She said, well, he needs help in class. I said, get him a tutor. She said, but I really want to go to class with him. I said, we'll send you another bill for tuition. Feel free. So we got her to stop going to class. He came to me at Christmas, and he said, I need you to talk to my mom. And I was like, why? I said, I need you to talk to your mom. Why is it me that has to talk to your mom? Your mom scares me, I'll be honest. He said, I don't know if you noticed, she's really clingy and I can't make friends. And I was like, I've noticed. So he said, I would like to move into housing. I said, I will move you into a closet if that's all I have. You will be in housing, sir. So we get him a room in the residence halls, and he starts to make friends without Mom. Fall semester, he did okay. I think Mom did a lot of his homework. Mom was really good at study skills. But spring semester, he started to do really well. He joined the tennis team. He made the team. He started getting connected in other ways. For the first 2 weeks, his mom called my office twice a day to check on him. And I said, I need you to call your son. Your son has a cell phone. She said, he won't answer. I said, I'm going to stop answering if you keep calling. I need you to stop it. So we got her to where she'd only call once a week. We did well, okay? That's one of those, we sometimes create more of a barrier by trying to be too much of a help, okay? When you think about challenge and support, okay? There's a whole theory around it. It's called Sanford's challenge and support theory. And if you think about challenge and support as a balance, okay? If your challenge is too much, too heavy, and you don't have support, students fail because they do not have the tools they need to be successful. But if you go the other way, and you have too much support, Mom, and not enough challenge, student doesn't learn. So it's this important balance that not only do family have to learn, but we have to learn as professionals when we work with students. How much support does this student need to meet this challenge? Basic needs, big challenge. But there's a difference between we have resources for you and let me gift wrap it for you, right? So some basic needs, really easy to identify. Food, housing, water, safety, transportation, financial support. Simple, right? Some are a little more difficult, especially if we sit in a place of privilege or come from a place of privilege. Access to health care, access to mental health resources, representation, going into a classroom and seeing a professor who looks like you or that maybe came from a similar place as you. We continue to see a rise in first-generation college students. Can you spot one? No, usually not. They still do look a little lost, but so do all first-year students, right? So those that are a little bit harder to identify, how are we still making sure that those students have the support to meet the challenge of being here? Some we just kind of take for granted, right? You're here, therefore you have access to education. But what I want you to understand is that access is not always opportunity. to say, here's your admission to college. That's step one, right? But if you can't pay to stay here, if you can't get the financial aid to stay here, if you don't have the skills, the academic skills to stay here, and you end up getting suspended, access does not always equal opportunity. Access equals something that we maybe took away, okay? But also access and opportunity is not always dignity. I think the easiest example of this is food pantries on campus. Adams State's probably the best way that I've ever seen a food pantry. But I've worked at other institutions where access to that food, so we've got access, you've got an opportunity to get it, but that means that you have to sign up, like you're receiving some kind of benefit. You don't have access to have meals with your friends because you're eating out of the food pantry. It's not a dignity piece. So some campuses do it really well. Some campuses have really good food service partners, other partners that make sure that students have the opportunity to have those kinds of experiences, to be with their friends and to have that dignity. And this is the challenge. As we talk about student basic needs, as we talk about social determinants, what I want you to keep in mind is, do we do this with dignity? Okay? So let's get to social determinants. See, we finally made it to the title slide. Let's talk about social determinants. Now, this came out of research around social determinants of health, where non-medical factors impact health outcomes. Okay? So things that people really don't have a lot of control over. Students are born into, well, people, we're not to the student part yet. People are born into an income and a social status, employment, working conditions, the education and literacy of their parents, family, caregivers, whoever it is, the education level that they see as the thing to work towards, right? Their own literacy. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, as they call them. Don't know why you would call something like that something fun like an ACE, but adverse childhood experiences that impact whether or not you go back to a doctor or to a dentist. Social supports. Do you have the coping skills that mean you don't always need to have that backup? Healthy behaviors, whether or not you even have access to health services. For many, many, many years, reservations did not have full clinics. They just weren't funded. We also didn't provide education for first people to be able to take back to their home, if that's where they wanted to go. And so access to health services became a government thing that could, for many reasons, not be trusted. There's a lot of horror stories around that. We won't get into that. Today's not about horror stories. But biology, gender, culture, whether or not these things even support you having access to health care. And I should put also gender identity, right? Because that is still a major blocker to whether or not someone has access to healthcare or inclusive healthcare or affirming healthcare. So that's something that should be updated. It's not updated in the research yet. It's not research I'm going to do. Health is not my thing. So social determinants of learning are those non-academic things that affect learning and educational outcomes. Now, Chamberlain University has done some really good research around this. So I stole their graphic. They know I stole their graphic. But social determinants of learning that they identified, things that have nothing to do with school, right? None of these things say go to class. None of these things say do your homework. But physical health. If a student is not healthy, I'm hoping they're not showing up in my class, okay? And if you do, don't cough on me. But physical health, psychosocial health, their social environment. So do they even have a supportive community that is pushing them to go to class and to do those things? Economic stability. A student that's cutting out every other semester to be able to pay for another semester of school is here for how long? And if they are here for that long and they're not making that progress, do we keep them? It's a big question. Their physical environment, self-motivation, I would say that a lot of these things lead to whether or not this is a thing, right? So all of these things, Chamberlain University says, this is good grounds for social determinants. I would pose the idea that there's a seventh. So we just named 6. right here. I would pose that there's a seventh, and that is belonging. Belonging is not only a social determinant that in many ways is not controlled by the student, but it's also a basic need, okay? When you think about belonging, belonging actually requires two actions, okay? You cannot take belonging. You can't say, this is mine, and I belong. That's not how it works. Belonging has to be offered. It has to be invited. And then it has to be accepted and maintained. So there's really kind of three actions, right? When you come to college, there are three different kinds of belonging that we deal with. The first is academic belonging. Basically, do you belong at this institution? This includes academic competence, right? This is something that we're going to teach. But we do this now really well for a certain number of students. This begins with the invitation of, here's your direct admit. This begins with an invitation of, here's your even conditional admit. Here's the reason that we're admitting you, because we see something in you, right? It's that invitation. So your admission, your invitation to belong academically to this institution. Student has to accept it by showing up. Now, there are ways that we also take that back, or that students feel like we take that back. One is when we have to academically suspend a student, right? At some point, there are times that that has to happen. But we used to have the language is all the same. I will preface this. The language in the probation letter is all the same. It's just in a different order now. But it wasn't always the most supportive sounding. And so that felt like rescinding that invitation for academic belonging. We're getting better at it here. This we're doing pretty well. The campus community belonging overall is how campus decides to behave, right? So the more we accept dominant societal norms, the more it sends a message about other languages, other cultures, other ideas. When we send out emails about executive orders, and we send those emails out only in English, well, a lot of those people are probably not going to be hugely impacted by those executive orders, right? So we turn around and we say, hey, Dr. Flo, can you translate these into Spanish? That is offering community belonging to a group of people. And then finally, social belonging. One of the things that I dislike the most, and I do it too, so I'm a hypocrite. One of the things I dislike the most is telling a student, you just got to find your fit. It's up to you, you just got to find your fit. No, someone's got to invite their fit. They're not just going to go out and be like, hey, I belong to your club now. No, they don't do that anymore. They did that back in my day. But that invitation still has to be out there. A person has to invite somebody to come to the event with you. Invite you to be my roommate and not steal all the food out of the fridge. Invite you to be in our club. Those things are a requirement, right? I could give you nightmare roommate stories for days. So where these things come together, and Margaret's going to throw things at me because I think she hates it every time I use this term. Where these things come together, they overlap and they do things, right? But right here is where we find the hidden curriculum. Don't throw things at me. So people don't like the idea of the hidden curriculum, right? They don't like the idea that we say there are things that you need to learn in college that we're not going to tell you that you need to learn, or how to learn them, or what they are, or where to find them. But that's kind of what makes them hidden, right? So you know, as a student, that you need to go to class, whether or not you do it. You know that you need to do your homework, whether or not you're going to do it. If you're a biology student, your actual curriculum goes something like biology, chemistry, all the things, right? But that hidden curriculum is kind of where Tinto's world comes in with, if you're not making those connections around campus and learning about those resources and learning about the people that can help you, you're still not going to be successful. I don't care how good at biology you are. You're still not going to have the resources that you need. And so that hidden curriculum is that piece of, you'll pick it up sometime in your 4 years. We're also not going to openly address it, unless you show up to my first year seminar class, then we make it weird. But we're not going to openly address it. We're not going to walk you through it. We're just going to hope that sometime in 4 years, you figure it out. Now, all of these things come together in these different interactions, right? Students have needs. This is Becky. Students have needs. We make policies. We have processes for things. There are some outcomes. And all of these things feed the data. The data turns around and feeds updates to policies and processes and what we learn about our students' needs and what the outcomes are. And this is a continuous loop. But here's what I can tell you. Through the process of doing those things, we have created barriers for some of our students. So first, I'm going to challenge us a little bit to recognize the struggle of power and privilege and the place that we sit, okay? Anybody in the room a first-generation college student? Yep. That comes with some things, right? You're just like, I don't know any of the things. But if you've graduated, that is a level of privilege that you carry for the rest of forever, okay? And what I want you to do when you think about that dignity piece, anytime you meet with a student, anytime that you're helping a student, or maybe not, dignity, because you live in a place of privilege with these students. So policies and processes, those are created by people who know the things, right? We create policies to make our lives easier, not necessarily to really make students' lives easier. We create policies and processes so that we have rules and guidelines that we don't always share with students. When we tell students that's against a policy and they say, where's the policy? Half the time I'm like, I don't know. It's in the handbook, so it's somewhere. But we don't really think about how it impacts our students. I have no idea why it's formatted like this. Here's a tab. But for example, we have a children and pets in the classroom policy. It's still there because it has not been done away with by academic council.
That's not ours.
Classroom, Margaret.
It's not ours.
This is you.
It's not
specifically.
An academic policy.
So think about the power, right? There's a power differential between the faculty who are teaching those classes and the student who maybe shows up with a child who acts like a pet, or a pet that they treat like a child, and that's fine too. But there's this power differential, right? And there's definite privilege in faculty who say you cannot bring children into the classroom, or from administrators, whoever it is that wrote the policy. I'll go delete it, I don't care. But also privilege for the folks that write the policy because we have more access to childcare. We don't always understand that a student just can't find it sometimes, right? We have greater access to childcare and backup childcare and ability to pay for it than any of our parenting students. And that privilege then is used to call out those who don't have it. Oh, why do you have your kid in my class? You can't have your kid in my class. I think in some instances it's actually pretty legitimate. Please don't bring your child to chem lab. You will end up with Spider-Man. But,
Maybe that's not a bad thing.
right, but bringing your child to first year seminar, cool. Bring your kid, give them a book, here's some colored pens, have some Legos. But when parenting students cannot bring a child even in an emergency situation, what we do is we put them behind. Because they come to student affairs, we're not going to give them an excuse. This is not reason for an excused absence on any of our policies because you could not find childcare. So we put them behind. They possibly fail. We've gone back and we've taken that academic belonging invitation and said, psych, jokes. I think psych is, what, 90s? Psych, jokes. We're going to take that back. What are some other examples that you can think of? If we go outside of children and pets in the classroom, which to me is a hot button topic. Don't tell me I can't have my pet. What are some other thoughts? Where do we create barriers for students? I see wheels turn. I'm going to make this like Sunday school. I'll stay here until you answer the question.
On the class schedule, we put room abbreviations or building abbreviations.
Yeah, on the class schedule we put ribbon building abbreviations. You know, I had a and day of the week abbreviations. I had a student ask me what day H was. And I said, well, back in my day it was TH and it's called Thursday. It's R, whatever it is. Whatever it is, see? Clearly I don't. Back in my day it was TH and it's called Thursday. But so we use acronyms, we use abbreviations, we don't explain those things. How many students do you think we could stop right now and say, what's EC? I gotta tell you, my first week here, my first fall here, I had a student stop me and they were like, I'm trying to find EC. And I said, what's the class for? I could probably point out a building if you tell me what class it is. They weren't entirely sure. I pulled up a campus map, and if you notice the campus map puts East Campus right next to main campus, and so I said, I think it's that one right there. I was wrong, they were late. But we do those things, right? We have new systems in place. I'm not gonna get mean about Workday. We have new systems in place, though, that students don't necessarily know how to use. So when a student opens up their Workday account, I'm thinking about delay graduation here. When a student opens up their Workday account, they don't always know that it's counting their current hours towards graduation. So they might think that they're a little bit closer than they actually are. We end up with students who say, how could I be short a class? Because math.
Not counting their.
Oh, Workday's not. Was
Hallelujah.
it Blackboard that was doing it before?
It was
Banner.
degree works.
Okay. So previous stuff, right? Though I will tell you, half of the students in my first year seminar don't know how to find their student account in Workday. I say, click academics. That's probably the best I can give you. So, but we do these things and don't always train students, right? We spent a lot of time communicating with faculty and staff about what Workday was going to mean and what that was going to be. And then we say, students are tech savvy. They're gonna pick it up. It's super user friendly. Has that proven to be super true? No. Not everywhere. Well, because our nephews keep on buying stuff online that they shouldn't get. So let's talk about change. I think change needs to happen in some places, not just change for the sake of change, but when we think about hidden curriculum, when we think about belonging and where those things come together, change does need to happen. In how we do things and when we do things and how those things are addressed, we don't always have to wait for the next strategic plan. We're in a really good point because we're getting a new strategic plan really soon. But we don't always have to wait for that. We don't have to wait for the next goal setting session. We don't have to wait for any of those things. Anytime we identify something, we can make change. It usually goes to committee, where it sits for about 2 years before it keels over. But the important thing is patience and consistency. I learned this term when I was in college. It's not meant to be something that gets me sent to Anna's office, but you tickle it, right? Has anybody heard of tickling your files? It means you touch every single one of them, every single day. It's a lawyer thing. I was going to go to law school once upon a time. I decided they were not fun. But you tickle your files. That's also how you bill people. Billable hours come from tickling your files. But if you touch something every day and put just a little bit of progress on it every day, then it moves faster, right? How do you eat an elephant, Jake? One bite at a time. So time, effort, know that there will be turbulence. People are gonna fight you. That's not how we do it. It's not how we always do it. Change is scary.
I have an example of that. So when I was working at Sargent, I noticed a safety issue. They were putting foldable chairs on risers.
Sounds safe.
Does that sound safe to anybody?
Foldable chairs on risers sounds great.
Sounds great. I told the principal, I think there's a safety issue. Her first thing, this is the way we've always done it.
Right.
And I'm just like, okay.
We had literally every event that I planned when I lived in Idaho was a safety issue. I feel like I got bonuses for safety issues. But a couple of examples, and as we talk, I'm going to talk to you about the change that we made. We were a damp campus, so we couldn't bring their own alcohol, but we provided a lot of beer. Multiple times a year, we would bus all the students down to Boise. where they would drink even more, and then we would try to get them back on buses to come home. And one year, many years, every year, we'd get kicked out of the venue because of how they behaved. But there was one particular venue that had super steep stairs. We had rented the second floor. So going in was like sobriety level expert, okay? Field sobriety test level expert to get up this wooden set of stairs. Students go up, they drink all night, great, have a good time. Buses do not come to the front door to pick them up. Buses call and say, we're here, and I look out and say, you're not, though. Oh, we're about a block away. We can't get any closer than this. Now, do you know what it's like to herd 300 drunk college students down a super steep flight of stairs through at least 2 blocks of Boise traffic on a weekend when half of them have to stop to pee every 40 feet? And when you do that in public, what happens? You also end up with new friends in uniform called the cops. So little changes that we made were things like change the bus company, right? Students would drive to that event. We started worrying about some safety issues with that. We bought a breathalyzer. Said, give me who your designated driver is going to be. Give me your keys. Once somebody blows a 0-0, they can have your keys, but I'm not giving you keys. Did we still have access to the event? Yeah. Did we still let them have access to the event with some dignity? Sure, as long as you came with a designated driver. So it was important to do that. Now, were there people that were super pissed at me that I did that? Yeah, one of which being my boss. He said, it's not as much fun when you make them blow in a breathalyzer. I was like, they line up for it. They love the breathalyzer game. They have competitions to see who can do what with the breathalyzer game. Give me a break.
And I have cops that think I'm lying when I blow a 0-0.
Yeah,
so.
And that's a problem. So we also had Spring Fling, best event ever. 6 kegs, 120 students that are of legal drinking age. What could go wrong, right? Had a student who, right before Spring Fling, it was months before, I should clarify, months before, he was running from a group of girls. And he jumped down a flight of stairs that was about this size. It was like 4 steps, people. And he jumped down the flight of stairs, and he lands, and he starts screaming. And I was like, good, that's great. His foot was flat against his shin. Coolest thing I've ever seen, but also loud because of the screaming. So we send him off to the hospital. I call his mother, and I said, you need to know that your son's on his way to the hospital. And she said, okay, what happened? And I said, this is what happened. She said, well, to be honest, I'm surprised he made it this long. He's kind of dumb. So some changes that we made. You are not allowed, this was during Derby days, this was a fraternity thing. You are not allowed during Derby days to chase the boys when they are at stairs. You have to wait until they come down the stairs. You can hold them hostage on the above section. You cannot chase them down the stairs. Discontinue your bad behavior or your really fun behavior. Same year, Spring Fling, so fast forward a couple months, he's still on a scooter. I won't call him a wimp, but he was still on a scooter. And we have this big mosh pit. I mean, this is an all-night concert, just bacchanal. And suddenly, in the middle of this mosh pit, there's a hole. And I go, I bet student fell down over there. Student did fall down over there, and her knee was doing this. And I was like, oh, that's gross, / really cool. So we call the paramedics, they show up, and they start to get her on the gurney, they take her back to the ambulance, and she was like, where are you taking me? Well, it's an ambulance. They're not here to take your kidney. So one of the paramedics said, well, we're going to take you to the hospital to get this looked at. And she was like, I can't afford to go to the hospital. Access. I can't afford to go to the hospital. He was like, I could try to pop it back in. She was like, yeah, do that. She was fine. She was feeling no pain. He popped it back in. She bounced right out of that ambulance back into the mosh pit, had a great time. And I was with the student that was still on the scooter, and I said, that's how it's done. Did she have access? Could she have afforded health care? No. Did we figure it out in a way that she could still participate? Yeah, kind of. Her mom was a little miffed about the whole thing.
Or about the Asian kid named Chuck.
That wasn't Chuck. Was that the dead kid on the soccer field?
No, there's one where you told me the police didn't believe his name because he
Oh,
was Asian. And got
Yeah,
his
no,
American
yeah,
name.
Charles. His name was Charles. Chaz is what he went by. In Boise, let's talk about dignity. Boise, we get an event shut down because it's loud. No surprise. And there's underage drinking. Also not much of a surprise. And I walk past the stage, and this student is sitting on the edge of the stage, and he was like, Savala, come here. I said, what? He goes, you tell that officer my name. And the officer was like, don't talk to him. I was like, he's mine. What did he do? He said, well, he gave us a fake ID. And he said, tell him my name. I said, his name is Charles. Charles is an Asian student. And the officer said, well, clearly this is fake ID because Charles is not an Asian name. And I was like, I highly recommend you get his badge number. Let's make some phone calls tomorrow. So in the way we deal with students is to offer the benefit of the doubt, right? So that's kind of an example of that dignity piece. Not everyone's going to be on board, and that's okay. When I started saying we're going to limit the number of drinks we give students, that was big. Started telling students we're only going to give you 3 drinks for the whole event. I saved so much money. I went from 6 kegs to 2. Caused a lot of screaming among faculty and staff who would show up at that event and do keg stands. So they were a little miffed that they had missed out on that. So not everyone's going to be on board, but you need to be transparent about why you're doing it. Okay? Over-communicate the need. Over-communicate the why. There's some references, should you decide you want any. But I did want to leave some time for questions. I did. Look at me, 7 minutes for questions. But I think what I want to go back to as we think about questions is this, is that idea of belonging being an invitation, how we give that invitation, how that invitation is then maintained once a student accepts it. But with that, I want to open it up to questions. Number 1, thank you for being here. Number 2, I challenge you to think about the way we work with students. Make sure that when we work with students, we do so in a way that maintains their dignity in whatever kind of work we're doing with them, whether it's helping them find resources, whether it's helping them make it through a process that they don't understand. But always make sure that we maintain that dignity for our students and recognize that if students don't have that sense of belonging, they're not going to be successful even if they do stay. So, thank you. Questions? Yeah?
Just kind of an observation. One
Sure.
of the universities, by the way, I worked at Chamberlain for a number of years. And this was something that was always at the forefront. And the interesting thing about Chamberlain is they didn't have dorms or housing. Most of their students were commuting students.
Yeah?
But especially for first-year students, you can create events and things and invite them, but sometimes when you add in an activity, you know, like a simple activity that we did was we would take decks of cards and we would distribute them. And your goal was to go around, talk to people, and try to find somebody that had your same card. So creating interactive opportunities for students, I think, takes that invitation more than just creating an event and inviting them to an event.
Yeah? Makes me think of Happy Salmon. That's why I pointed at you. Happy Salmon. When I was in Idaho, I feel like we did first year stuff pretty well there. We had this whole first year experience. And one of the first things we did, students showed up, first year students showed up before any of the other students showed up. And because they had their own residence hall, we didn't have to worry about, oh, athletes are already here, they're gonna wreck it for us. But then we took all those students 3 hours away to McCall, Idaho, and they got to spend the night. They got to have a little camp out. And then they would always complain that there was no barbecue, that there's no meat at the camp out. Seventh-day Adventist campsite didn't have meat. Literally the only complaint we ever got. It wasn't, none of us had beds. It wasn't, I had to sleep by bugs. It wasn't, it was super loud. They made me go pull weeds. Every single commencement speaker for the 15 years I spent at the College of Idaho talked about their McCall experience. Talked about the person that they sat next to on the bus that they didn't know before, because we assigned seats because we were those people. Talked about the person they sat next to on the bus that they had never met before, that then became their roommate, that became their best friend, that they're still friends with. Huge when you can do something with an activity that gets them somehow connected to somebody. Yeah, good observation. Other thoughts?
Savala,
It's a race. Rochambeau. Rock, paper, scissors.
We'll go with Nick, how's that?
Okay.
So some of these are things that as staff and professionals we can do to construct a space that is fostering of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, students go back to their dorms and you can't control the interactions they have with other students, but how do we, to the best of our ability, frame a space of social belonging where, even though we can't control certain behaviors, we maybe create the conditions for
Right.
fostering better belonging than would otherwise maybe be the case.
Right. So we know that they go back to their residence halls, right? Whether or not they go back to their room, we know they go back to their residence halls. How much programming do we do in the residence halls that we don't ask housing to do? How much programming are we doing in the residence halls? Like none, right? One thing that at a previous campus that we did for all of our residence halls was we would have kind of a rotating faculty night. And we would ask faculty to come in and not talk about your field, talk about your hobbies. Talk about things that you like to do. Come meet students, come tell bedtime stories. Students lined up for bedtime stories. It was moderately weird. But come and do things that make you seem like human so that they'll come to your class and not be afraid of you. But when we know students are in certain places, are we programming in those spaces? No, not much. So that invitation of belonging, if I want you, Nick, to come to a party, am I going to send your invitation to Mark? I mean, I could, but are you going to get it?
No.
Right? It's going to be, wow. Ouch. Okay, shots fired. No belonging for Nick. So, but the point is, like, if I know you're in your residence hall and I only program on the south side of campus, did I really even invite you to the belonging piece?
So what about trying to, because that's kind of like meeting them where they are, but what about like when we went around to the residence halls and knocked on them, like, that's what I was thinking is to try and, those events, that was so fun, and the students were so surprised, because I think it did bring that, like, I'm coming to you. You're belonging here because I'm coming to you.
Right. And we should do more of that. We do that once a semester. I'm not saying we should do more house calls, because the number of students that were like, please don't come in, and trying to like shut the door behind them so that we would not see the contraband dog that was barking at us and things like we know it's there, okay? And even when you do try to serve students in their space, when COVID first hit, how many of you remember when COVID hit? I think all of us, right? I'm not going to ask you if you remember the Black Sox. But when COVID hit and we were saying you have to quarantine, but that was the norm that we created, right? We created this expectation that they weren't going to get to play with others ever again. That was also created for everybody who was in high school and middle school and junior high and elementary school. I'll tell the story. But we created that. And we said, you get no social interaction. So it should come as no surprise that now they don't know how to socially interact, right? I had a student when COVID hit, I delivered meals. Made my boss super mad because he was like, if you catch COVID, I can't replace you. And I was like, I'm super replaceable, don't worry about it. So I was out delivering meals. They were supposed to be in their room. There's a caveat, right? If you're quarantined, you're in your room. Knock, knock, knock. No answer. Knock a little bit loud. Police knock. Mormon missionary knock. Bam, 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 bam. And I hear, who the is it? And I said, well, it's your friendly neighborhood dean of students. I've got your dinner. And he opened the door in his underwear. Like, I just said who I was. Please don't do so. But that's the expectation we set, right? Was that you have to stay in your room. And now We're trying to say, no holds barred, come out of your room, and we really haven't given them the skills to do that. I think that when we look at places of belonging, a good place to start is in the classroom.
You also caused their chances to go to pro baseball, by the way.
I did. The entire baseball team quarantined, and it was all my fault they didn't play in the MLB. But that academic belonging when they come to class, right? We know that they're going to come to class. And I think that where we can build these other pieces of belonging is in the classroom, in introductory level classrooms, right? So if we want students to talk to each other, we start it there. We expect them to talk to each other in class. We expect them to go to things. First year seminar forces them to go to things and take pictures and prove it. So how do we build more of that into introductory level courses so that we're building new rules for them and new norms? I am over time, and I'm sorry. Jess, what were you going to say?
And this could be really simple, though I'm sure it's going to be an extended conversation later.
I like them.
And kind of, I guess, really just curious in an accountability way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have experience teaching FYS.
Mm-hmm.
I guess your hot take on what is being done well that's meeting this, and then more importantly, possibly, what are we missing the mark on that we should rethink or recapitalize, redirect, recalibrate?
Yeah, so I think what's well, and I'm going to make blanket statements, right, because everybody teaches differently. So when you look at the curriculum, I think something that we do really well with that, with kind of that social community belonging, is the Grizzly Engagement Project, requiring them to go to different things and then prove that they did. It's kind of awkward. I think that another thing that some do well is this expectation of providing feedback as students turn in assignments, whether it's a short reflection essay, which is what we did in my class because none of them responded well when I said the word journal. They were like, I don't journal. I was like, okay, we'll do short response essays. And they were fine with that. I don't know why. But when you have an assignment for a student, you need to provide feedback. It needs to be thorough feedback and make sure that they understand whether or not it's meeting your expectations. But part of it is also personalized feedback, right? So when a student talks about their experience as a first-gen college student, which is who my class was supposed to be for, validating the experiences they were having became an important part of that feedback so that they felt that continued invitation to engage. I think where we maybe struggle with that belonging is that it depends on the teacher, right? Depends on who's teaching it, where there's not always that space to get to know each other and not always that space to get to know your professor. So there's a struggle, right, when you go into any classroom and all you have is a sage on the stage, like what I did to you tonight. Death by PowerPoint is what Becky calls it. But that creates a disconnect. So what we need to do, I think, is find more intentional ways to force students to engage in the classroom and somehow tie it into the curriculum and how they have to engage with each other and with the professor. Good question, though. I mean, thanks for putting me on the spot. It's great. We'll have a longer conversation about it too. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. Thanks for those that were able to join online, and thanks for the opportunity, Jess.